Aloha everybody, and welcome to the Wild Wahine. This is Kaylani, and this is your astro forecast for this week, November 1st through the 7th. So we have a lot to talk about, so we're going to really just super jump right in because November has a lot of different energies that are coming through. Uranus is essentially like the significator for the month of November, but November and December are very much connected just because the energies are the same. We're reactivating that Saturn-Uranus square. We have Venus that is entering the sign of Capricorn, which we'll talk about today. That's going to be retrograde in December. We have a new moon this week that's happening in Scorpio. And then we also have Mercury entering Scorpio as well. So that's essentially like the bulk of what we're going to talk about. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the energy of next week, just because that'll be coming in through the weekend, and that's going to have a lot more kind of crunchier, heavier energy, and I want to just give you the heads up on that. So let's start with the new moon that's happening in Scorpio. So Scorpio is the sign that the moon is in fall in. So it's definitely not like the strongest place for lunar things, which would be like emotional things, things that have to do with comfort, things that have to do with safety, things that have to do traditionally with like what the moon signifies, the body and all of those things. So we just want to be kind of careful negotiating around that. So with a new moon, we have the sun and the moon that are conjunct in the same sign. That would be in Scorpio, and it's going to be opposing Uranus. And so this whole like opposition to Uranus, and that which is like, you know, kind of that surprise that comes in that shakes everything up, it starts with the new moon, and it's pretty much going to be going throughout the entire month and also going into December when we have that Saturn Uranus exact again, and that has been the transit that has colored our entire year. So it really starts with this now, and so it's like kind of a little bit challenging because, you know, these are places, especially for fixed signs, which would be signs that are in Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius. Fixed signs like to focus on something and really just stick to that one thing and see it through to completion. There's a certain level of endurance that fixed signs have. Well, Uranus is not about enduring anything. It's about breaking things up and breaking up the system and shaking all of those things up. Wherever it is where you have gotten very deep, it's all going to come in there and mix it all up. So what essentially does that mean? So some of the positive things that can come from this, if you're thinking about like doing any sort of like new moon ritual, which a lot of people do because it's the beginning of a lunar cycle, also because the sun and the moon are in the same sign, so they're kind of like, you know, your will and also your like emotions around things are together, so it's easier to kind of sort of focus that. This would be a really good time for things that are scorpionic. So scorpionic things would be things that are of the healing nature, things that are investigatory, where you're doing deep research, things where you're kind of transforming something in your life, you're letting something go, or you're taking on something that's going to be for your betterment, those types of things, and being open to the change and the shifts that happen. It could be that something is snatched away, it could be that something big is given it to you. You know, Uranus is neither malefic nor benefic. It just comes and just says, I'm just like a child almost, like just I'm messing up everything, and then it's through that you're just like, oh, I just found, you know, I've had to clean all this up and go underneath the table, and you're like, oh my gosh, I just found my ring that I thought I lost 5 years ago. Like, it's that kind of thing. Like you initially will look at it and say, this is a hot mess, but then at the end you're just like, wow, but like if that didn't happen, then this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened, and this, it's like the catalyst for so many things. So sometimes it can be very welcome energy, even though it's very stressful, especially if you like everything to be perfect and in order and to have control, which is essentially what you would want with the sun and moon in Scorpio, is like, I need control. And also squaring Saturn, which is we need control, like control, and then something that's out of control, and you're negotiating between that. So that is not moon in a happy place, you know, emotional things in a happy place. Some of the things that you can embrace is breaking free, the revolution that, you know, is coming, and it can come in a lot of different ways. Sometimes we do need to kind of like revolt against things, you know, in our lives, especially like in our emotional lives, in our relationships. If there's things that just have not been working, you do need to do that. Also, we're going to see that as something that's happening in the world. We can kind of sort of already see that all of that energy is coming into a pinnacle for November. So like, this is the time that people will say, no more, this is what I want to do, and I am going to stick with it, because it is Mars, but it is Mars that is much more strategic, not like Mars when it's in Aries, where it's a little bit kind of all over the place. This is definitely well planned, well thought out, and it's executing, and it's like, in Mars's sign. So it more than likely is going to get it done. And then with Uranus coming in there, just kind of sort of messing stuff up, it could be a little bit chaotic at this time. The positive thing though, I'm like the positive thing, transformation, that can be a good thing. New possibilities, that can be a good thing. Optimism about how things are going to change. Challenges, of course, is the rebelliousness. Rebelliousness, again, Uranus can be rebelliousness for rebelliousness sake, freedom for the sake of freedom. Freedoms are great, but if freedoms are also snatching away other people's freedoms, then they're not so great, right? Then you have to negotiate, because then we have two people fighting for freedom. So then whose freedoms is more important? And that's when you get into a lot of things where everyone's like, well, my freedom is more. And it's like, no, my freedom is. And then, that's that conversation. We're not in Libra season where we were trying to talk things out and Mars is kind of tamed down and we declawed Mars. It's in Scorpio. So it's like a body armor with a stinger. So it's a different kind of energy. This is energy that definitely will make contact, that will be divisive, that will be up in your face or behind your back getting you. It sets a trap, in a way, and then it kind of can ambush you too. So a lot of different ways that Mars is working right now. Can be very unexpected because Uranus is there, so we never know. Oh my gosh, out of nowhere, here it is. And electrical and kind of a little bit like magnetic in a way. And that can be challenging. So a couple of things I want you to think about are, what are your needs and what are your desires? What are the things that you desperately want? And where do you need to have change that's very active in your life? Uranus doesn't always have to come out of nowhere. You can embody that Uranian energy, right? You can say, okay, I'm going to just like wherever it is that has been just heavy on me, the thing that I've been struggling with, the thing that I've been inactive, the thing that I need to let go, the thing that I need to embrace. I've been the one that's kind of like hidden from that. I want to embody the Uranian energy, and I'm going to be the one that kind of sort of allows that to happen, or I'm going to take that action. That could be something that you do. It also could be you're just there focusing on doing the things you're doing and healing and kind of like looking at your life, and then things come. A certain amount of flexibility that needs to be had, and it's hard because we're not in a flexible place. We're in a kind of like, this is the way I do things, mic drop kind of space. That's Scorpio energy a little bit, which is why it makes it a little bit more challenging. Next up, we have Venus ingressing into Capricorn November 5th all the way through March 6th. So this is going to be like essentially I think about 4 months that Venus is in the sign of Capricorn, which is why I want to break it down, because that's a long time for Venus or Venusian things to be in Saturn's home, and Saturn can be really wonderful for Venus in terms of providing structure, talking about things that are like old and beautiful, preserving, the way things were, so that they like, you're preserving the old so that the young can eventually have it. But it also can be very stale, and it can be dry, and it can be cold, and it can be like not loving, and it can feel incredibly lonely. And especially with the retrograde that's happening, it can feel like, where are the gifts? Where is the beauty? Where is the yummy things? And that can be challenging. Some of the positive things that can come from that: building long-term relationships, bridging together your team, getting your soul family in there, your work team together, and saying, let's work together and let's do this thing. Let's build this thing together. It can be really great for that. It could be somebody that actually wants to invite you into a long-term relationship, like a love relationship or a marriage, or however that manifests for you, however it is that you describe that in your life. Something though that is long-term, something that has commitment, something that has a certain level of structure. If you've been waiting for it can be great for that. Be gifts that last a long time. People celebrate many holidays, in the next couple of months. A lot of gifts are exchanged. So one thing that's really important, since Venus will be retrograde, and that is actually happening December 19th through January 28th, 2022. So Venus will be retrograde at that time. So I wanted to give you guys the heads up now that I just think things when it's retrograde are going to be delayed, and Venus usually brings gifts and lovely, wonderful things. And so flights delayed, if you're like traveling to meet family, gifts that don't get there on time, all of those types of things. So you want to just plan that early. You want to understand that things are going to be a bit discombobulated all over the place. And you have to also factor in that the holiday spirit that people have is probably going to be non-existent. It will be more hostile for sure, because Venus is retrograde. So, just plan ahead of time. Being in the malls and all the shopping and the crazy is probably something that you don't want to do. Order online, get in there early. If you see something in the store and you're just like, oh, I should get that, I'll wait later, get it now if you're a gift giver and if you like to do that. But it also could be passed on gifts, like nothing that you're purchasing, something that you're given that was your grandmother's or your grandfather's, or it could be a home, things that are of value that last a long time. Those can be like kind of Venus and Capricorn type of things. Now, Venus is going to be conjunct Pluto. That's happening on the 26th, and that's going to feel a little bit heavier. So that can be the transforming of our relationships. It also could be information that was hidden that we didn't know that totally changes it completely and comes to the surface. And this is in our interpersonal relationships and also in the world during this retrograde period. Like, we will be revisiting things, so it can look very difficult and challenging for some of our relationships in terms of loneliness that can happen, in terms of breakups that can happen. It also could be a breakup that was needed because, or separation, because there's a certain aspect of the relationship that just was not working, and so we're going to no longer be that, and we're going to transform into something else. There is a transformation with this. There is a, like, whether you're transforming in the sense of leaving it behind and going and doing your own thing, that's a transformation. Or it can be, we're coming together and we're saying this doesn't work and we want to do something different, so that's a transformation that you did together. Either one, those are things that can happen. It could just be the lack of sweetness in your life, like before the holiday season, when people usually eat a lot of really good and sweet food, like suddenly there's a diet change and like all of those, like no sugar, you know, and you're just like, really, can't we do this like after the holidays? So there's like structure and strictness, a lot of boundaries that come up in relationships, control, and how you're negotiating control, and one person like putting a lot of boundaries and over controlling the situation. That can be really rough around this time, especially with that, you know, with it conjunct Pluto. That can really be a challenge, and can also, you know, manifest itself in a violent way, you know, and especially when we're talking about Venus, these are things that have to do with women typically, or the female archetype in some way. So I'm just, you know, that's interesting in terms of like what will happen with that retrograde and also with Pluto. Difficult relationships where people feel stuck, relationships where people are working partners. If you work with your spouse or things like that during the retrograde, is just going to be really, really important that you guys take some time off, you know, take some downtime, enjoy. Like, it can be quite intense, you know, if you're like living with a person and loving them, and then you're also working the business together, and, you know, and sometimes that can make for a little bit of a staleness. Like, you know, when are we not coworkers, or what, you know, like we've lost the juice, you know, so to speak. It's dry in here, you know, and so like that is also some things that might need to be transformed. It might come to a pinnacle and get a little rough before you can transform it and move over. So just something that you should know. Mercury is entering the sign of Scorpio. That's happening November 5th to December 12th. So positive things that can happen for this particular transit. Mercury is our mind, right? It's communication. It's also like money, monetary exchange. It could be our siblings. It can be the way that we communicate, and also just transportation and just our cars and short-term travel and all of that type of stuff. So in the sign of Scorpio, the mind tends to be very analytical and wants to go very deep and wants to know the truth. Of the utmost importance, having the truth, finding the truth, and being able to kind of psychoanalyze things and go deep with that, being very inquisitive. It really wants to, you know, just take away all the bullshit and just get to the point and get to the heart of the matter. This is like heart talk in a very raw way. So, you know, we can see this kind of energy, especially with, you know, Venus and Capricorn. You might be restructuring that relationship because you're having these heart talks. And sometimes, you know, when you have heart talk, sometimes it's beautiful, and sometimes heart talk can be really rough, you know, like people are telling you things that you just did not want to hear, you know, your relationships and things like that, and with your jobs and all of that, and it just becomes very difficult to negotiate around. But it is information that you need to know because things need to change, and sometimes the only way things can change is through getting some information. So deep dive into yourself, deep dive into others, the ability to fixate on something and really hyper focus and get things done. The energy for that should be really, really powerful. So that's going to be really good. Some of the challenges that can happen with that, of course, is just secrets. Digging too deep into things, getting yourself involved in a rabbit hole in some sort of like conspiracy theory kind of thing, whether it be like a global conspiracy theory, whether it be like an insecurity that you had about a spouse, and so you check their phone, and then you're checking all this stuff, and then suddenly all of this information, and you're like, I have something, and sometimes you might, and then sometimes you might not, and you might have blown up everything just because of that sense of like insecurity or just need to know, and then suddenly you start making associations that are actually not like good associations, and then that can cause some problems and some issues. So that is it on its kind of like more extreme form. Communication that is direct, but that has a sting, that has a bite, not communicating in a way to really like hear the other person out, but communicating into trying to force your will and control can be hard. Aggressive communication, communication where lots of like mean things are said that really are soul penetrating, that can be hurtful, even though they might be true. That is rough, and that can result for sure in firings and breakups and other problems in your life, you know, as you're negotiating that. We're not in the Libra energy where we're trying to balance things out. We're kind of just like saying them how they are. And that kind of sort of leads us a little bit into energy that's upcoming into next week that I wanted to talk about, with Mars squaring the moon and Saturn. That energy is kind of a little bit of a heavier energy that's happening, that's coming in. Mercury is going to be conjunct Mars in the sign of Scorpio, and then it's going to be squaring Saturn right now in the sign of Aquarius. Mercury's not a benefic or a malefic planet. It just is a planet. It's kind of the transfer of information, whether it be good or bad or however. But since it's like kind of like playing ring around the rosy with the malefics, it can definitely take on a darker, sense. So manipulative conversations and communication that gets out of control, long-term, like malefic type of plans that are happening that want to overthrow systems, because it is Saturn trying to gain control. This opposition to Uranus that happened that wants to just kind of sort of blow things out. Like, it's definitely a control of information, a control of how much will get out. We want to just be careful because it's Mercury and Mars, that accidents, that you're driving carefully, that you're not doing road rage that can result in just horrible accidents and or like just fights and other types of violence that can happen like on the road, and also with your travel and all of those types of things. Just being very careful with that. Mechanical failures of different things, like all of those things we kind of sort of see happening. And travel issues, people will be traveling a lot because this is the holiday season, right? And so that is just rough because the niceties, and we can already see like there's a lot of videos that are out there of people traveling, and it's really gnarly, like how like I've seen flight attendants getting like beat up and things that are just like unbelievable. And I just, Venus retrograde and just Mars and Mercury, it just is not looking like people are going to be really lovely when there's problems. So whereas before they were like, okay, I'm holding back, this is definitely an unleashing. So it's just something, some information for you to know. So not to end on that note, but that is the energy, but there's so many different ways that we can negotiate that. Mars Mercury can also be like a great time to write, a great time to get in there and do something, difficult or something that's challenging. It could be a good time to like push yourself, athletically to a certain level though, but because, it's Mars and Saturn, you don't want to push yourself over so that you end up getting injured, because that can happen, lots of injuries that can happen, so you just want to like push yourself enough and work on things, but you just don't want to go overboard. The propensity for you to be able to go overboard is really high, so you want to be careful of that. So that's what I have for you for this week. Thank you so much for joining me. If you value this content, or if you got something from it and it was able to help you out, make sure you subscribe and you like, and you can definitely pass it along to someone else. You can find me on Instagram. I usually post there daily or multiple times, sometimes on my stories a day, at _wild_wahine. I'm also on Clubhouse every Wednesday. We do tarot readings. We talk about spirituality. And then every other Thursday, we talk about herbalism. We usually pick a herb and kind of break it down in terms of its astrological correspondences, its magical uses, and it's also the mythology behind it. So there's a lot of really interesting things happening. If you're interested in getting a tarot reading or an astrology consultation with me, you can find all my information at www.thewildwahine.com. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Aloha.